Everyone has heard this statistic before. The top 20% of men get 80% of the women. And most guys hear that and immediately feel either frustrated or defeated because it sounds like some kind of fixed system where only a small group wins and everyone else just doesn't. But I want you to actually slow down and think about what that really means. Because it's not just a number, it's a pattern. And patterns don't exist for no reason. There is a psychological structure behind this. There is an evolutionary reason behind this. And there is a behavioral gap that most men fall into without even realizing it. And if you actually understand all three of those layers, you stop seeing this as something unfair and you start seeing it as something predictable. Let's start with the part everyone jumps to first, which is looks. Yes, looks matter. I'm not going to sit here and pretend they don't. Physical attraction is the entry point. It's the first filter. But it is not the deciding factor in who ends up in that top 20%. Because if it was, every good-looking guy would have options, and that is just not what happens in real life. You can literally test this yourself. Go out to any social environment, a bar, a party, even a university campus. Watch who women are actually paying attention to. It's not always the best-looking guy in the room. It's the guy who feels like he belongs there without trying. There's a difference. And that difference comes down to something deeper than appearance. It comes down to perceived value and emotional impact. There's actually research that backs this up in a really interesting way. Studies in evolutionary psychology, especially from researchers like David Buss, consistently show that women prioritize traits like confidence, status, and social dominance over pure physical attractiveness when it comes to mate selection. Not because women are calculating in a cold way, but because those traits signal stability, competence, and long-term survival value on a subconscious level. So when people say top 20%, what they're really talking about is the group of men who trigger those signals the strongest. Now here's where it gets more uncomfortable, but also more useful. Most men are not excluded from that group because of their genetics. They exclude themselves through behavior. They over-pursue, they over-explain, they over-invest too early, and in doing that, they remove the very thing that creates attraction in the first place, which is tension. Let me explain this in a way that actually makes sense emotionally. Attraction is not just about comfort. It's about movement. It's about progression. It's about a feeling that something is building. And when everything is given immediately, when there's no resistance, no uncertainty, no emotional pull, the experience becomes flat. I'm going to be really honest here, because this is something women talk about privately all the time, even if we don't say it out loud. The men who are the easiest to get are rarely the ones we become emotionally invested in. Not because we don't like them, not because they're bad people, but because there's nothing happening emotionally. There's no build. I had a situation last year where I was talking to two guys at the same time, and I didn't plan it like that. It just kind of happened. One of them was incredibly consistent. He texted me good morning every day, asked about my day, responded instantly, and made it very clear that he liked me. And logically, that should have been perfect. But there was no tension. Everything was predictable. Everything was available. I never had to think about where I stood. Now the other guy was completely different. He wasn't rude, he wasn't playing games, but he had his own life. He replied when he wanted to. Sometimes he would disappear for a bit and then come back like nothing happened. And when we talked, he was present, but he wasn't trying to impress me. And I caught myself thinking about him more. Not because he was better, but because he created emotional movement. And I remember one night specifically, I was literally sitting there rereading a message he sent earlier, trying to understand the tone of it, trying to figure out what he meant by something small. And I actually paused and thought to myself, why am I doing this? Because the other guy had already given me everything, and that's when it clicked for me. Attraction grows in the space where things are not fully certain. Now let's take this to a real-world example, because I think this makes it even clearer. Look at someone like Pete Davidson. He has dated some of the most conventionally attractive women in the world, including Ariana Grande and Kim Kardashian. And every time people see that, they react the same way. They say, how is he pulling these women? But if you actually look at his personality, it starts to make sense. He's confident without being try-hard, he's self-aware, he's emotionally expressive, but not needy. He doesn't feel like he's chasing validation. And most importantly, he creates a unique emotional experience. That's what matters. Now let's go even deeper into the evolutionary layer, because this is where everything connects. From a biological perspective, women are wired to be selective. Historically, choosing the wrong partner had serious consequences. So over time, certain traits became signals of value, not just strength, but direction. Not just confidence, but emotional control. Not just availability, but selectiveness. The top 20% of men trigger those signals without needing to explain them. And this is where modern dating amplifies everything. Because with social media, dating apps, and constant exposure to options, women are seeing more men than ever before, which means the filtering process becomes even stronger. The men who stand out are not the ones trying the hardest. They are the ones who feel the most grounded in themselves. And here's the part most men don't realize. Trying too hard is the fastest way to disqualify yourself. Because effort, when it's coming from a place of needing approval, feels different. It feels heavy. It feels like pressure. And women pick up on that instantly. I had another experience that really changed how I saw this. There was a guy I went on a date with who was objectively attractive, had a good job, and on paper, he was everything you would expect to be high value. But the entire date felt like he was trying to prove himself. Every answer he gave had this underlying need to impress. Every story felt slightly exaggerated. Every compliment felt like it had an expectation attached to it. And by the end of the date, I felt tired. Not because he was a bad person, but because there was no ease. Now compare that to another date I went on a few months later. This guy didn't try to impress me at all. He wasn't showing off. He wasn't trying to win me over. He was just present, calm, direct. He asked questions, but he wasn't trying to control the conversation. And the difference in how I felt was immediate. I leaned in more. I wanted to know more. I felt like I was choosing him, not being convinced by him. That's the shift. The top 20% of men don't try to be chosen. They create space for you to choose them. So now the real question becomes, how do you actually become one of those men? And this is where I'm going to give you real advice, not the generic stuff. First, you need to build a life that does not revolve around women. And I know that sounds obvious, but most men don't actually do this. If your entire sense of worth comes from whether a woman likes you, she will feel that immediately. And it kills attraction. You need direction, something you're working toward that matters more than validation, because that's where real confidence comes from. Second, you need to become selective with your attention. Stop giving it away so easily. Attention is value, and when you give it to someone who hasn't earned it, you lower your perceived value instantly. This doesn't mean ignoring women or acting cold. It means having standards. Not everyone gets access to you. Third, you need to get comfortable with uncertainty. This is huge. Most men try to remove uncertainty as quickly as possible. They want clarity. They want reassurance. They want to know exactly where they stand. But attraction grows in uncertainty, in the space where things are still unfolding. The top 20% of men don't rush that process. They let it build. Fourth, stop over-explaining yourself. This is one of the biggest mistakes I see. When you feel the need to justify everything you do, you are communicating insecurity. High-value men don't do that. They move with intention. They don't need to explain their every move to be understood. And finally, develop presence. Not just being there, but actually being there. The way you look at someone, the way you speak, the way you listen. That's what creates impact. Because at the end of the day, this is not about becoming a different person. It's about removing the behaviors that are holding you back. The top 20% of men are not a different species. They just operate differently. They don't chase approval. They don't overgive. They don't try to be liked by everyone. And because of that, they stand out. And when you stand out, you don't compete the same way anymore. You become the one being chosen. That's Lexxie's advice.